All right, starting lesson 5.3, congruence and triangles. Now, if the corresponding angles and sides of two figures are congruent, then the two figures are congruent. All right, so if all the sides and all the angles are congruent, then the two figures are congruent. Now, simply stated, if two figures have the same sides and angles, or they can perfectly overlap. Overlap is the key idea behind congruence. It means like having the same shape. Then they are congruent. Now note, corresponding means parts that are similar in structure. All right, so here we have these two triangles below, and it says to label the diagram above. Okay, so corresponding angles. All right, well, which angles are similar in structure? Well, A would be congruent to D. So we'd say angle A is congruent to angle D. We have B is congruent to E. Angle B is congruent to angle E. We have C is congruent to F. All right, so angle C is congruent to angle F. Now, corresponding sides. Let's see here. We have AB. That's the same thing as ED. And then I have AC, which is the same thing as DF. And then I have BC, which is the same thing as EF. Alrighty. Now, triangle congruence statement. Important. When writing a triangle congruence statement, order matters. Alright. So, if I start off with A here, I'm going to draw my triangle symbol first. If I start off with A here, what angle is A congruent for the other triangle? That would be D. And then I have B. B is congruent to what angle for the other triangle? That would be E. And then I have C. C is congruent to what angle for the other triangle? F. All right, now I could have had the letters in different order, but they should match up. A is congruent to D. B is congruent to E. C is congruent to F. All right, the order matters. All right, make sure you read these two statements below here. Going on to the next example. Example 2, in the diagram, ABCD is congruent to KJHL. Okay, find the value of x. All right, here's x over here. It belongs to an expression that represents the side length of KJ. All right, now KJ is congruent to what side for the other figure? Well, that's where the order of the congruent statement comes in handy. That would be AB. Here I have AB. So these are the same. So all I have to do is 4x minus 3 is equal to 9. Add 3, 4x is equal to 12. Divide by 4, and x is equal to 3. Done. How about for y? All right. Here I have y and this expression that represents this angle measure for h. So here's h. That corresponds to c. Here's c. All right, these are the same. So 5y minus 12 is equal to 113. I add 12. 5y is equal to 125. Divide by 5, and y is equal to 25. Alrighty. Going on to example 3. Find the value of x. Okay, let's see here. I have one arc for these angle measurements. That's 22 degrees here. Then I have two arcs here. So this one has two arcs. So that makes that 87. All right, and then all the angles together add up to what? 180. So 4x plus 15 plus 22 plus 87 equals 180. So add like terms, and I get 124 equals 180. Subtract 124, and I get 56, and then I divide by 4, and x is equal to 14. Done. All right, going on to some more examples. All right, going into proofs now. All right, so just building off of what we've learned in the past. All right, we have AB is congruent to DE. All right, and C is the midpoint of AD and EB. All right, C is the midpoint of AD. So if it's the midpoint of AD, that means these are the same. And of EB, that means these are the same. Okay? All right, I need to prove that the triangles are congruent, that they're identical. All right, so let's see. AB is congruent to DE. That's given. That's given. All right, then it says AC is congruent to CD, and BC is congruent to CU. How do we know that? Well, that's just definition of midpoint. All right, we know it divides the segment into two equal pieces. Then it says ACB is congruent to DCE. All right, well, those are vertical angles. All right, then it says angle A is congruent to angle D. Angle A is congruent to angle D. And angle B is congruent to angle E. All right, well, how do we know that? Well, we have the given information here that these lines are parallel. So those are alternate interior angles. And I can say that the triangles are congruent now by this reason. All corresponding parts are congruent. All right, I know all the angles are congruent, and I know all the side lengths are congruent. So that makes the triangles congruent. All right, let's do another example. Third angles theorem. All right, if you know that you have two pairs of angles that are congruent, then automatically then you know that the third pair must also be congruent. Alrighty, so let's do example 5. AB is congruent to BC. D is the midpoint of AC. So I know those two parts are congruent. BD bisects ABC. BD bisects ABC. So I know these are the same then. Okay. Now, this is given information here for the first statement. AD is congruent to DC. Well, I stated that because why? It's just definition of midpoint. All right, and then I have angle ABD is congruent to CBD. How do I know that? Well, that's definition of angle bisector. All right, then I have angle A is congruent to angle C. All right, well, this is an isosceles triangle here, so I know these angles across from the congruent sides must be congruent. So that's known as the base angles theorem. All right. And then I have ADB is congruent to CDB. ADB is congruent to CDB. Now, how do you know that? We already have two pairs of angles that are congruent, so the third pair must also be congruent by the third angles theorem. All right, then I have BD is congruent to BD. All right, that's the reflexive property. All right, so now I've shown that all the side lengths are congruent and all the angles are congruent. So then my reason for stating that the triangles are congruent is that all corresponding parts are congruent. All right, let's do one more example to finish up the lesson. All right, determine if the triangles are congruent. If so, make a congruent statement and state the main ideas that were used to conclude that the triangles are congruent. Okay, so for part A here, they give me a lot of information between these two triangles. And the only thing I'm not sure about is this one side. But they both share that one side. So you could say it's congruent to itself by reflexive property. All right, that's your reason. And so now I've shown that all the sides are congruent and all the angles are congruent, or they give me that information, plus what I just discovered, the reflexive property. So now I'm going to make a congruent statement. Triangle WZX is congruent to, now be very careful here with the order of the letters. W is congruent to Y, and all right, now here's where students mess up a bit. Here's Z, all right, or it's WZX. All right, so now what angle is congruent to that? This angle here, so that'll be YX Z. All right, see how it works? All right, you could start off with any letter that you want, but you have to make sure that in the end, these angles correspond to one another. Okay? For part B, let's see what we have here. I know that I have two sides congruent, or two pairs of sides congruent, and one pair of angles congruent, and there's no other information here to indicate that they are congruent. I can't say that they're not congruent, I just don't have enough information. So your answer can be not enough information. Alrighty, that's all there is to this lesson. If you have any trouble, make sure to ask for help. Begin the assignment.